What is up, Geeks and Geekettes? It's another episode of the Countdown to the Geekcast. My name is Steady, and this is going to be a very long-awaited and unusual episode. We are discussing the finale of Game of Thrones 1 year later. That's right. With me on this episode, on lease from the Countdown City WrestleCast. Thank you, JC. The one and only Big Mike. How's it going, sir?
I'm Mike, and dear God, it's still 2020.
We're like almost halfway done, almost the halfway mark. We've made it this far.
Not that I would know anything about this, but I guess it's like getting to 13.1 on a marathon and then being like, oh, so I got another 13.1.
We got halfway to go, exactly. And maybe, who's to say if this is making it better or worse that we're revisiting the finale of Game of Thrones?
You know, amidst everything that's going on right now, it's really way down on the list of bad things at this point.
Way down. What happened to that meteor that was supposed to hit us? That came and went in like a matter of hours.
I thought I remember hearing that it was just the media hype, that it was always going to be like miles and miles away from us, but it was just closer than it's ever been. So.
Yeah. Miles and miles away, but it was a meteor that was like miles and miles long. So one of those things. Mike, I appreciate you joining me. I already mentioned, this is going to be a very unusual episode. For those of you who are listening to our show around the time Game of Thrones Season 8 started, the hype was real. We had a premiere party at our favorite gaming lounge, Play Live Nation. Shout out to Chris and them over at Play Live. Great turnout. All of the gamer chairs were taken up. We had surround sound going through all the speakers. We had, 15 high definition televisions playing the show. Everybody had the best seat in the house. And you were surrounded by a group of individuals like yourself who are willing to go out of their living room to have an experience with other people. Yeah. The hype was real. I had a great initial reaction review with our good friend Will from Will Geeks Out. Check him out on Twitch. And he also joined me on a reaction video for The Long Night. So the hype was real. Everything was going very well. And then somewhere along the way, you saw the roller coaster going over the hill, down the track, and that ahead of you, you can see that there was no more track. And that's where you were going. And unfortunately, the finale came and went. And it's not all about this, but I didn't have the motivation anymore to talk about Game of Thrones. And I don't think I was alone in that.
No, and I guess it depends on where you are in the fandom. I think a lot of people were starting to see flaws way before season 8 and a few episodes in, but I think it had gotten so big that people were willing to, forgive it and okay, come on, let's finish this. This has been awesome. But yes, and then season 8, I feel like it's one of those movies and one of those things where I just try to justify it, and I look back and I'm like, I was just lying to myself.
You can't anymore.
I mean, there were some good spots, and I'm sure we'll talk about them, but yeah.
No, and I definitely agree. We're definitely going to get to some of these things. Last, I'll say the other reason why I didn't have the motivation to talk about the finale is because my wife was weeks away from having our baby girl.
Yeah, that's understandable.
So I was starting the whole father thing over again. You know what that's about. So by the time the finale came around, I was no longer in geek or Game of Thrones mode. I was all in, supportive father mode, supportive husband mode by that point. So it's basically twofold reason why we didn't get around to it.
Yeah.
But it made sense in my head for this show to spend some time on it a year later because the initial knee-jerk reaction is gone. All the emotions, all of the impact of either surprise or disappointment or joy or whatever it was that we all went through a year ago is gone.
Yeah.
Now we can have an honest discussion about Game of Thrones.
It's
It's
gonna be
so weird
honest.
watching this episode again a year later. I never thought I would watch it again, but here I am watching it again. Here's where I want to start out.
Okay.
We're not going to get very granular with this. I don't think it's necessary because this episode, this entire season's been talked to death, by millions of people already. But I want to have, a very honest conversation about sort of watching it again, and then, how our perspectives have changed, maybe where we were before, and maybe where it's changed now, and what stayed the same in your mind, in your heart, in your soul. Because I always told people, they would ask me, should I start watching Game of Thrones? And I would say, yes, but you need to take a picture of yourself, because once you start watching Game of Thrones, you're going to lose a piece of your soul. Part of you is going to die. By the time you see the Red Wedding, half your life, or just, whatever, part of your soul is gone. You're never getting it back. Like, Game of Thrones has just done so many emotional things to the fandom.
Yeah, quick little anecdote to throw in there. So after I watched season one, I read all the books in the year or whatever between season one and two because I've always loved
Nice.
reading. So I knew what the Red Wedding was going to be about, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
I knew the general idea. Okay, so I got my wife into the show, and so we got real into it. And we watched. So when the episode was coming up for the Red Wedding, I was like, oh, some stuff's going to go down. Okay, so obviously there are some changes from the book in
Right.
the Red Wedding and the TV and the
Right.
movie, the TV show. One thing that wasn't in the book was the wife of
Catelyn. Catelyn
no,
Stark.
not the mom, the wife of Rob Stark, the one he marries instead of the
Yes.
daughter. Right. In the
Yeah.
book, she's not there, and it's not even it's a whole different lady in the book. But anyway, it's not the important part. Well, so it's not in the book. They
Uh,
don't stab the pregnant wife in the stomach. And I didn't know it was going to happen. So that happens, and my wife is traumatized. And she is mad at me for like weeks. Like, why didn't you tell me? And I was like, I knew they were going to get ambushed. I didn't know that was going to happen.
good
Like, that
Lord.
was something they added in because in the book, the wife, who's another character, is not even at the
Right.
castle at the time that they get ambushed. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that was the show itself. That episode was pretty horrific. And then, I had to deal with that for like a month afterwards. So.
I'll ask you this first question, and then we can get into season 8. Season 7 was on par with what the fans expected, right? I'm sorry. Yeah, season 7. As far as how it
Okay,
started,
so
where it went, and how season 7 ended. Would you agree?
I think it depends on where people are in the fandom. I think, especially toward the end of the season, there were some things where you could tell they started playing fast and loose with time.
Yeah.
In the first season, like what second and third episode is them going down the road back from Winterfell to King's Landing, and that's like 2 episodes worth of time.
Yeah.
And then towards season 7, they're running out north of the wall, coming back. She's flying out on a dragon, all within like 5 to 10 minutes. They're crossing oceans, and all of a sudden they really condensed time. And I think that's one of many things where people started going, okay,
It's getting weird.
I'm going to stick with you, but you're giving a little too much there. You need a, and I think that's honestly just been one of the biggest problem is the story was slow. It covered a lot of detail, and then all of a sudden, when they decided, no, we're not going to take 10 seasons, we're going to compress this, they just really went quick into some things that didn't feel Game of Thrones like.
I agree with you that it was something to adjust to. Season 7, I was willing to let that go only for the sole fact that what other TV show can you think of where fans were really worried about, how time was effective? 24. That's it. The only other TV show in the history was 24, where you can see like they haven't eaten in like 12 hours. I've been watching this whole time. Nobody uses a bathroom on this TV show. Jack Bauer's been running around the city for like 18 straight hours. He hasn't taken a nap. What's going on?
I can buy into that, but
Yeah.
there was the one episode where they go north of the wall to find one of the White Walkers, and they send Gendry back, and he runs all the way back to the wall, gets the like all within like 5 to 10 minutes of the show.
True.
And I guess the other thing is they never really let you know how much time has passed.
They tried, but it wasn't effective enough.
Like if they would have indicated that party was sitting there in the middle of a frozen lake for like 3 days,
yeah,
somehow, then maybe like okay, like they're just trying to get to it quickly. But it made it seem like they took a nap, woke up, and he'd run all the way back, got help, let the mother of dragons know so she could come back, and I was just like, oh, okay, we're all. So there were things. I mean, I think a lot of people were still willing to forgive it, and it had garnered so much love, and I think people were willing to, be okay. We'll go with that. It's still great. There's still a lot of things you're going to pay off.
Yeah.
And then season 8.
Season 8, I think the start was done well. Leading up to the long night, which I know that's kind of where people started jumping off the bandwagon. I do like the long night. I do like what they gave us. I think they had a lot of ideas. It was a high production value, in my opinion. I like strategic battles. I love me some Vikings. If you watch Vikings, you're going to see a lot of strategic battles. I'm all about that. I'm a strategic colonel, general kind of guy when it comes to like medieval fight scenes. So going up to the long night, I think I'm still on board with everything. I know that's where fandom started dropping off because expectations were not met with regards to maybe how it ended, and also like who's taking out the Night King. There's also some issues with time. There's also some issues with details, such as it looks like your entire army is wiped out. What are you going to do?
Yeah, I mean, strategy-wise, what was the strategy in sending the Dothraki?
Dramatic effect.
By the way, let's point out that the Fire Priestess is not Melisandre, showed up when they weren't expecting it. So they were sending out the Dothraki with regular weapons before she showed up to light them on fire.
Yeah.
Against beings that they weren't sure how to kill,
right?
Except with fire, or with dragon glass. So maybe not the best strategy, other than for the image of the horses and the whole Dothraki army riding out.
All dramatic effect that I bought into greatly, but I will say that my first criticism about season 8 is that somewhere along the way, the focus of the show became the sets, the production value, which I just gave a compliment about. I'm talking about with regards to the armies, the details, and all that. But somewhere along the way, especially going forward past the long night, the show, they decided we're going to build a castle. We're going to start, we're going to build King's Landing from the ground up. We're going to build the city around King's Landing. I mean, they spent millions on building the sets and, building all the props. And somehow that became the focus, and the focus was taking away from the lore, which I was always hoping the show would keep in the front of their mind.
Right.
You set up these subplots, you set up these myths, you set up these biblical, sort of religious type stories where the one hero is going to come of ice and fire and all this stuff, and he's going to save us, and none of that pans out. And so for me, outside of how everything else happened, one of my biggest just criticisms, no matter how the show ended up, I mean, I think it ends up okay, but to spend so many seasons on the lore of Game of Thrones, on the history you keep repeating and bashing into our heads about Game of Thrones, building up to the Jon Snow reveal, like all of this is supposed to mean stuff.
Mhm.
And for that to be just non-existent in the final season was the biggest letdown. Doesn't matter who ended up on the throne if you aren't focused on concluding all of these theories and myths that the story built up, not the fans. Let's just
Yeah,
make sure
no,
that I get that across.
I'm with you 100%. And so I don't know how much you were into Game of Thrones. I know you enjoyed it.
Hmm.
It was one of the things that I had really gotten into
Oh
once I
yeah,
started watching it. So I was looking at Reddit and YouTube videos and all
for
this other
sure.
stuff, learning. So I mean, clearly, I think we both know that one of the main reasons it took a dip was because George R. R. Martin was only through book 5, and it was supposed to be a 7-book series.
Yeah,
And so at some point, most of those stories, which, I mean, I'll be honest, the first several seasons, they did a great job of taking a really dense book and taking the certain storylines and crafting them really well. Even things, if they weren't exactly like the book,
yeah.
they did a really good job of adapting that book and getting people engaged in this story about the first 5, 4 or 5 seasons, whatever it is. I've seen a lot of people, discuss where it really starts to turn, but either way, once they had to finish the story, and like they said that George R. R. Martin told them where he expected the main characters to end up, what was the main resolution. So in theory, even people like I'm not really happy with what the ending gave us. This is supposedly what should happen in the books. But it seemed like once they had to kind of write the story and connect it themselves, it just didn't go as well. And and also to your point, you're right. Like there was a whole bunch of things. Is it called what is it? Chekhov's gun? The old thing in writing and stories where like if you
Yeah,
show something here, you better use it later
you
on.
better use it later on.
They didn't use a lot of things later on.
No, they did
They set
not.
up a lot of things and then they were like, oh, we kind of forgot about that.
Yeah,
Which I think is a famous meme now from one of them. Is like, oh, they kind of forgot about.
you're right. No, no, no.
I'm with
It
you
is.
100% on that.
One of the things that they kind of forgot about that I'm willing to let go of is like Arya's arc. Arya's arc went from being, uh, bruised, beaten, traumatized for seasons
Mhm.
into forgetting her identity, or let's say losing her identity in order to become a force that she could use to avenge her family,
Yeah.
which she does that with the phrase. Um, Mountain, she kind of figured she covered that. She checked that box when she left him for dead. And then to conclude her arc was
The
to,
Hound, not the Mountain.
ooh, you're right, the
Yeah.
Hound. The Hound. And then to complete her arc, going after the Lannisters, the remaining Lannisters. I needed something official, finite to happen to the Lannisters. If either Cersei gets killed by her brother, she gets killed by Arya. The Mountain decides to like, I'm just gonna go nutso and take out everyone. Dany kills Cersei. I needed
That's
something
where I was hoping.
finite to end Arya's arc, and so for it to kind of end up where it did, where it's like I didn't get to kill her. I guess I don't need to fight anybody anymore. It's okay, but it's not satisfying. And so,
Yes.
like, that's one of the ones on the fence for me. I'm kind of willing to let that go because her no longer having to be a badass, because I really felt like she was losing herself, being an assassin this whole time, losing that humanity in her. So, her letting go of that, I can kind of go with that. It's not as satisfying, but that's the one that's on the fence for me. Um,
Um,
any thoughts about that
I
one?
Yeah, like I agree with you. I know a lot of people are upset with her killing uh, the Night King the way she did. Um, I, it's not the worst thing. It's
No, it's not the
my biggest
worst.
problem with the whole thing was, again, you built up from literally like the first thing you see on
Yeah.
season 1, episode 1, is about the walkers and the
The Night's
people.
Watch.
Well, no, the Night's Watch, but the the zombies,
Yeah.
the White Walkers, killing those rangers, and you're told they're a threat, and they make these designs with the people's bodies, and then when you finally meet the Night King, like he basically can't be touched by anything.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that being part of Arya's arc, I wouldn't have minded so much, or I don't mind it too much, but his arc seemed pointless, and after all that, just to kind of go down like that, and also Jamie Lannister's arc, which
Ah,
they took back after all his growth and development and literally changing as a person, and then just to go back to I that's the one that gets me. I don't care who he ends up with per se,
yeah.
but I have no idea why you gave him that entire arc of changing, and then he goes back to her. I can't. Yeah,
You're right. If Arya is the one that's on the fence, I'm willing to let that slide. Jamie's on the side of I can't. I
right.
can't let that slide. I had this great idea, which again, it's not about fulfilling fan theories, but fan theories are definitely generated from facts,
Yeah,
clues, myths, what you
paying attention
think's
to the
going
story.
to
Yeah,
exactly what you think's going to fulfill a person's arc, what would make sense, what's in the realm of possibility. So I had
right.
this great idea that Jamie would go to fight the Whites and the Night King, and then he would be the one to kill the Night King. And other than John, if I was to see Jamie Lannister go from uh the king killer, what do they call him?
The Kingslayer.
The Kingslayer, to go from being the Kingslayer in a negative connotation to the Kingslayer in a positive light, how great is that?
Yeah,
In my opinion,
that would have been pretty interesting.
that's incredible. And so I would have been totally fine with something like that happening. But to leave your sister because she's insane,
Yeah,
and you left to go put your life on the line to save the world, you save it, and then you're like, I'm good now. Like, what? That doesn't satisfy anyone in the least.
right.
Um, and you're talking about the long night. I needed John to do something of a little bit more value.
Yes.
If you don't have him kill the Night King, at least show me why he's here. And I can't think of too many great reasons why he's there. In my I Danny sort of was holding her own against him with Drogon.
Yeah.
I don't know if John's not in this battle if a whole lot changes. I mean, 90% of their forces I think are still dead.
Uh, You know, I'm starting to feel if you look at certain things, you could almost say that about Jon Snow for the entire series once it ends. I mean, let's he's the main character, right? Like I know there's a
Right.
lot of characters, but I've always felt like it was mainly about Jon Snow,
Yeah.
right? And
Everybody did. Yeah.
so yeah, so yes, I mean, you thought season 8 he was going to shine. I mean, he already had great moments throughout, but
Sure.
he was supposed to be the chosen one. He was, I mean, the whole reveal of his true parentage didn't really matter in the end. But yeah, I mean, at the long night, he's yelling at a dragon. I mean, he's killing a bunch of things, and he's yelling at an ice dragon or whatever. I wanted to see the sword fight with the Night King at least for a little bit,
Just a little
something,
bit.
just something.
That's all we need. How is this not on the whiteboard when you're like writing out season 8? You know what? Marvel, their writers for Endgame. I'm not gonna remember their names. Chris something and something something.
Yeah, definitely something.
They start out with, and I think J.J. Abrams did this too for Star Wars. Maybe they start out with
Sure,
like,
we'll say that.
what are the things we want to see happen? And if in Endgame, you're like, all right, we're gonna have Spider-Man flying with the Infinity Gauntlet in his arms. We're gonna have Captain
Gonna see
Steve
Captain.
Rogers holding Mjolnir. Like things
Yeah.
like that. These are the things you have to get to. Doesn't matter how, but these are the things you have to get to. Somewhere Star Wars didn't have on their whiteboard Carrie Fisher, Mark Hamill, and Han Solo getting all back together. Harrison Ford. Somehow that wasn't on the
But
whiteboard.
obviously, they had the Emperor comes back. They knew it all along. Always in the stars.
That's a whole other discussion, man. Game of Thrones should have had anywhere in season 8 at least a short sword fight with the Night King, just like you mentioned. Just something satisfactory. If John's not going to kill him, at least have him here for a reason. You have to show us why he's here. As far as like, does he matter at all in season 8? I guess the only counter argument would be he's the one that takes down Daenerys at the end of the season. So is that really his only value on this show? Is that their only reason why he came back from the dead in order to take her out? I mean,
Right.
his parentage reveal, other than it being a complete, mind fuck that we all expected, it at least added some tension of like, oh my God, I'm doing my aunt. What's she gonna feel about this? She was a little bit cooler than he was about it.
Yes.
But still, like, at least that added some drama to the
Yeah,
story.
its first reveal,
Yeah.
it was
It's
a big
like,
game
ah,
changer.
it sure was. And
But
Danny's like kind
then
of pissed at him about it. Like, whoa, you're not gonna come after me now, are you, bro? Stuff like that.
you're right. Other than to bring tension between them, yeah, like I don't know. It didn't seem like it. It's one of those things again where you said earlier that you wanted to see certain things from all the myths and the stuff you set up, and his parentage for a long time was such a big deal. Like from the
Yeah.
beginning of the series, he's Jon Snow, he's a bastard, but you realize early on there's something about that, right? Because they all said Ned Stark was an honorable man, he wouldn't have done that. So there's something. And again, of course, if you read the books, there's stuff in there, and if you follow fan sites, people figured it out, years ago
Yeah.
what was going on. But it felt like, okay, this obviously is going to be a huge thing that's going to play a big factor in the end. And I don't know if it really does.
It
I mean,
doesn't.
it draws tension between them, but she's kind of going crazy anyways. So maybe it's the straw that breaks the camel's back, but I don't know.
I mean, Targaryens aren't as like picky about who they sleep with to begin with, so
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, neither are the Lannisters. It's
Yeah,
really
that's
just
true.
the Starks that care about it. If
Yeah, I guess so.
everybody else in Westeros is like, it doesn't matter. Love is love.
Just keep it in the family, the royal families, I guess.
All right, so finale talk. Um, the first thing that stuck out to me when I did my rewatch is the pacing. Nothing happens for a good 40 minutes of this episode, and I'm here like, you were dragging out all of these insignificant moments. And then the one moment that did matter, the biggest moment arguably in the entire series between John and Danny. Spoiler alert for any of you guys watching this for whatever reason. But the biggest moment in the entire series, arguably, between John and Danny is him stabbing her in the heart. And that happens in like 5 seconds flat.
Mhm.
Kiss,
There's no
stab,
tension to
death.
it, right?
And I'm like, why are you not milking this moment? Why did you milk every other moment on the show? John is just staring into the distance blindly in the camera for probably a good 10 minutes of this episode. Tyrion is looking miserable for a good 7 or 8 minutes of this episode, not saying a word. Now, I love Tyrion, though, because he's been my number one character probably this entire show.
Yeah,
And so he
he's
has his
great.
moments to shine. But the pacing to me is the thing that stands out the most in my rewatch. I'm like, this is all fluff. Like, let's just spend time on the stuff that matters. We don't need to waste time looking at the ruins of King's Landing. We saw how bad shit got before. You don't need to like do this again. Or they're just like, look at this big, beautiful set we built. Stuff like that.
And I think that's what's disappointing because it's the
Ah,
last episode.
the last.
It's, and I think even I remember watching. I mean, not this the rewatch, but watching it originally. I think I was still holding out. Okay, This is the last episode. They'll pull some things out.
It can still be good.
They'll try to save themselves at least with some moments, maybe some end game moments that just be like, oh, and then they did.
No, none whatsoever.
Although, okay, going off the moment you were just talking about with where he actually kills her.
Yeah.
I do love the memes that came afterwards once the dragon lands, and you think it's going to take out Jon because he killed Daenerys.
Sure.
And it melts the throne. And I love the memes that came afterwards where like the dragon has like a thought bubble and he's like, I'm burning this throne because I understand that this is the wheel that we always try to break and the political reasons, and this is really what's killing everybody. Like, because really the dragon gets that apparently. He's just
Sure.
like, no, this is what needs to end. Let's end the throne.
I'm willing to let that go too, yeah.
And then we don't really end the throne, but that's
No, we don't end the throne. It's still, I don't even know. Like King's Landing is still rubble. I don't know. They build it back up. The castles. I don't know. Who cares anymore, right? It's like, who cares anymore? You don't give us anything interesting at this point. All right. I don't want to rant. I just want to keep talking about this. I'm very interested in like the immediate after effect of Daenerys dying. Drogon just goes away with her corpse.
right.
And during my rewatch, I'm like, couldn't Jon have just said like, she didn't want to be queen anymore? She said, I'm out. And she just took off. Cover up this blood on the floor.
Oh man, she said she's gonna go take the dragon and she's gonna go try and conquer lands across the sea. I'll run stuff right now. It's cool.
I asked her to sign a prenup and she bailed. I don't know. So yeah, I'm like, what's the immediate aftermath? And we don't see it. It fast forwards a few weeks.
And honestly, on that point too, Jon would have been dead.
Right? There's no way he gets out of there.
Crap, what's his name? The eunuch.
Grey Worm?
Grey Worm, thank you. There's no way after the way Grey Worm fought for her the whole show, he'd be like, oh, let's put you in jail and let's go have a trial.
Nope.
Like no. Jon's dead, or they're at least fighting.
Yeah. And his girl was killed by these Lannisters. Oh. Like, he has nothing left. Of course he's killing Jon as soon as he figures out what happens. You're right. He has nothing to hold back anymore. He's got no queen. He's got no wife. He's got nothing else. So yeah, he's totally killing Jon. I don't see how Jon gets out of that alive.
And you just reminded me too, because going back a couple episodes to her death, somehow that was one of the hardest ones for me in the series.
Everybody loved her.
Yeah.
I want to say her name's Dasani, but I know that's water.
No, it's Missandei.
Missandei, there you go.
Something like that. Yeah.
I had it backwards. Dasani. Okay, anyways.
She's not water. It's okay.
She's not water. All right.
We see her in water once or twice, but that's about it.
So Dany's death, it doesn't hold up at all to me. It doesn't hold up a year later. It didn't hold up when I first watched it. Doesn't hold up a year later. Drogon burning the throne, cool visual. I'll buy that. But and then Jon somehow not coming out of that with a spear in his ass. I don't understand how that works out. Fast forward to what really matters, and I'm gonna take a step back. Going into this episode, either this episode or the season before it started, Vegas had odds on who was going to sit on the Iron Throne by the end of the season.
Probably before the season,
Probably before the season, right? Okay. And they totally got it right on the money that Bran was going to – that was the worst odds, was Bran was going to sit on the Iron Throne. And when I saw that, I'm like, that's weird. I would give you 5 better answers based on evidence on who would sit on the Iron Throne before Bran. And they got it right. So clearly they knew something that nobody else did. I really should have took that bet. I don't know why I didn't, but I really should have took that bet.
And I don't know. Again, so we said that, Martin told them how the book's supposed to end. So maybe in his book, through much more detailed and a better story to get him there, maybe Bran winds up on the throne. this book did nothing to set that up. There
Yeah.
was no sewing these little things to be like, oh, right, Bran, that makes sense. They were just like, who
Nope.
has great stories? This guy who
This
like
kid.
didn't do anything and supposed to be able to take control of animals, but didn't really do anything with that. Like he just sat there and like let other people like protect him. And what's his name, the Greyjoy who defended him from the Night King's like,
Yeah.
you're a good man, you're gonna
Yeah.
die. Yeah, I
This scene in the rewatch was cringy because we went through this whole dramatic sequence with Danny dying, and everything before that is also dark, like all the dark images and dragon behind her with the wings, opening up. Everything's dark at this point. Then you get to this scene where they're discussing who's going to be on the throne, and then Sansa's uncle gets up. She's like, "Sit down, idiot! What are you
yeah.
doing?" So that was weird. It was just weird to start making these corny jokes at this moment. And then Sam Tarly, he starts talking about democracy, and everybody laughs at him, including the Starks. They don't laugh out loud, but they were still like chuckling on the inside. You could tell. And so I'm like, now we're laughing at trying to make Westeros a democracy. Like,
Which was one of the
what?
purposes that Daenerys was trying to do. I mean, I know she wanted to take over, but she wanted to free them, like she did in all those other cities,
Exactly.
in previous seasons. So yeah,
It's just, so to me, it's not like the worst thing, but it's just odd timing that now we're just sitting here cracking jokes instead of like trying to make this all worth our time, worthwhile. Like,
yeah, I'll say it's not the way I wanted to spend the last 20 minutes of 8 seasons of Game of Thrones. That's not what I wanted. Yeah, that political thing, and then even a little bit later when they're just sitting at the table and they have the council back together. He Tyrion's just moving chairs. That's not what I wanted out of the last 20 minutes of Game of Thrones.
so bizarre. It's so bizarre. I don't know. It's just, I don't know what it is, but it's just, this isn't, this doesn't matter to anyone. You should have just stuck thing that matters. Like, I don't know, make them like about to kill John or something. Like, give us something more. Tyrion, I'll give it to you. Is spot on, perfect in his performance at this point. His whole reasoning for putting Bran as the king. I mean, like, it's okay, and but you undermine him when Sansa's like, we're not gonna do this. We're just gonna have our own kingdom. And I'm like, but your brother is the king. Like, you're not. You don't have to be independent if the Stark is a king, right? Doesn't that make no sense? If you're
Yeah,
like, no, we're not gonna be ruled by a foreign leader. No, it's your brother. What are you talking about? I know she didn't say foreign leader,
yeah,
but
I know
she's
what you
like,
mean.
no, we're going to be independent. And I'm like, but the king is your brother. Like, you already are
You
one
think he's gonna
step
care
ahead
if
of everybody else.
the North hasn't paid their taxes? It's fine. I'm gonna sit in my chair. I don't really care. I don't. No, I'm
Uh,
with you on that. Like it's because I also heard people saying, Sansa just goes like, "Oh, we're gonna be free," and the other what Greyjoy was there too.
yeah.
They were fighting for their freedom like all the time. They rebelled. They said we're gonna make the Iron Islands our own country again, and they're just like, yeah, we're part of
They
it.
have more of a reason. Yeah.
We're gonna stick in. We're good.
So it completely undermines everything Tyrion just beautifully and eloquently said. For
Yeah.
you to just sit there and be like, we're just gonna do whatever we want. So I'm just like, what, why? It pulls you completely out of the moment, in my opinion. Again, isn't the most terrible thing to happen, but it just, Tyrion said all this stuff. Bran put him on the throne. He's convinced everyone, and then you get to Sansa and completely undermines everything that just happened. So I didn't like it. Just make her queen. if you make her queen, you still get your crowning moment at the end of the show. Arya still sails off. Jon can still be banished because the queen is his sister-ish. And then she still gets her crowning moment. But you don't, if you're just doing it for that, I think that's all that it's done for, is to make sure she gets a crown at the end of the show.
Yeah.
You said something earlier. Martin tells Dan and Dave how the entire book ends. I don't think this is how it ends. I think somewhere along the way, George was probably like, and I have no evidence to back this up, but if I'm George, I've spent decades of my life pouring all this time and energy into a world that I created.
Yeah.
I'm not letting somebody else close the book on it. I'm not letting somebody else close a chapter on it. So I'm not sure, but I'm willing to bet somewhere between season 6 and 7, George is like, listen, I've changed my mind. I don't want you to do it the way I did it, because I've spent all this time. I've foreshadowed all these things. I've not foreshadowed Bran sitting on the throne. It'll be a surprise. Why don't you use Bran instead of what I'm going to do? Something like that. I don't think that the books are going to end the same. I really hope they don't. I really don't think they will. I think there's a much more coherent story. I mean, there's more characters in the books to begin with, so nothing's going to be one for one. But I think the books are going to have a more coherent, more satisfying ending. I mean, even John dying is more satisfying than this. I would have been fine with like a Romeo and Juliet thing where like Danny dies and then John's like, I can't go on without the love anymore of my life, so I'm gone too. Drogon, open wide, something like that. I'm fine. That's more satisfying than just, this is the Dexter ending. This is the lumberjack ending where John goes off into the woods. This is what happened at the end of Dexter, and HBO didn't learn from Showtime. You just don't lose your hero in the wilderness. That's not how you end a show.
Yeah.
Your turn.
I don't know if I would have been okay with John killing himself for Danny, because I think he realized by that point he cared about her, but that wasn't going to work out. But no, I like I feel like there's merit to your idea. First of all, that J.R.R. Martin, having put all this time and effort into his world,
Yeah.
would be a little bit hesitant to let them show how he plans to end the book. And I also believe from watching some of the stuff that was it Dave and Dan or whatever the two
Dave and
are,
Dan, yeah.
yeah, were at the time arrogant enough to believe that they could finish it their own way, change it, and it would be awesome. You know, I remember there was one of them saying, you know, we really have to depend. Our decision is going to be, is the finale an A or an A plus or something like that, and you know, it was an F. But I like that idea because you're right. Like, and you know, I'm pretty sure the sixth book was supposed to come out like 5 years ago, and he just keeps delaying it and delaying it.
Yeah.
So he's obviously putting years and decades of his life, like you said, into it. Yeah, I don't mind so much the John going off into the wilderness. I honestly thought he was going to die in a heroic way because
Sure.
he was a hero.
That's more satisfying.
So that would have been way more satisfying. I do like that he got Ghost back at the end, since they decided they didn't have any room for Ghost, and he didn't say goodbye to him the first time. So
how do you miss these details? What happens to a show when you forget the main character's faithful pet, and then you start forgetting that there's Starbucks cups in the shot? Like, who's the person in charge of like knowing that? Because there are people who do that in Star
Right.
Wars. In Star Wars at Lucasfilm, they have a group of people who are entrusted with like all the knowledge of Star Wars content and history
Right.
and stuff. I don't know why you just don't have somebody like, oh no, this needs to happen, or we need to make sure this, and oh, Starbucks wasn't around in Westeros at the time. Let's get that cup out of the shot. there's no barometer from anyone on the show that like we should have Ghost a few more times. I do know that the dog stand-in for Ghost had perished. I think had died between season 4 or 5, maybe, or 6. Maybe that's the reason why they don't have him as much.
Well, I
But
remember
still,
hearing it had to do with the CGI because apparently by the
it
time
was
they were
all
at 7 and
surprising.
8, like he was supposed to be bigger than a regular dog. Like he was supposed to have grown
Yeah.
to a size, almost like a bear or something like that. And I remember hearing that they were gonna cut back on that CGI because of the dragon and stuff. And I guess, but again, Jon Snow, and that's another thing. I'm actually happy that we didn't start calling him Aegon Targaryen for the last like 3 episodes or whatever it's supposed to be when he fought. I guess the last season. He's Jon Snow. He was Jon Snow from the beginning of the book. So I'm glad they never really, even after finding out who he really was, changed his name. But Ghost was such a huge part of his character,
Yes.
and he again was, in my opinion, the main character. And then to just kind of ignore it, like in battles and in important scenes where having Ghost would have made sense, that Ghost would have protected him or done something, it just doesn't make sense.
You're missing so much potential by not incorporating Ghost in some way. If the fans have a choice between more Ghost or you having a set that looks like King's Landing, a realistic King's Landing that you build from the ground up, we're choosing Ghost.
Yeah.
That's what we want. It's like Shaggy without Scooby,
Yes.
Han Solo without Chewbacca, Indiana
Yeah.
Jones without his hat. Like, you don't do it. There's no point in going forward without them together.
I agree 100%.
I don't want to rant.
I'm okay with ranting.
Yeah. So, yeah, bizarre. Again, this goes back to the whiteboard. Before you start writing season 8, you should have had a whiteboard that said A through G need to happen no matter what. And one of those things is as much John and Ghost screen time as possible. I love that you brought up his real name because, like, you're right. That whole moment, the whole secret about what his real name
Yeah.
is, how long was that a thing? That was a thing for a while where we didn't even know his real name, even though we knew who his parents were.
Right.
And that didn't matter in the
Nope.
least.
Not at all.
That's
And,
why
and again, I come back to, like you said at the beginning of this podcast, there were things that they set up. There were seeds that they sowed.
Yep.
There were myth and stuff that they built, and then they just didn't care in the last season about it. Yeah, I mean, there. I don't even remember the character's name. There's a lady who shows up every now and then around Daenerys, and she has like the weird face mask, and she's like some sort of priestess that like told her about a prophecy. Can't even remember what the character is supposed to be called.
Not
Shows up like once or
Shay.
twice. No,
Her name was
whatever it
I know
was.
who you're talking about.
She shows up like once or twice. You think it's going to be important, and then never again.
Never again. And it's not for a lack of time. You had time. You had over I don't want to rant. They had time in production to kind of fill out these things. They had time in the episodes because each episode was an hour to an hour and 15 minutes,
Yeah.
right? To kind of put in things. And then you had all this dead time that you spent watching John walk into a scene without saying anything for 5 minutes or Tyrion looking miserable for 10 minutes. You had, I think the opportunity was there. I think the potential was there. And it's not making Game of Thrones the worst show in history. You're still arguably top 5 shows in the history of television, just for the sole fact that like the popularity had never been bigger for another
Yeah.
show. Um, piracy downloads have never been higher for another show, and
I was
that's a
gonna say,
great
especially for
barometer on
something,
how popular a show is.
yeah, for something on HBO where you have to get access to it through some sort of pay method, in
Premium service, yeah.
without, yeah, without, if you're not going to pirate it. It wasn't an NBC show or,
No,
even an AMC show, which you still have to have on cable, but it's a little bit easier than
definitely.
HBO. Yeah, and I made this comment. We talked about it. It was part of the national consciousness for a long time. It was a pop culture sensation. People knew references. They talked about it, and a year later, I don't think anybody even cares about it. Like
No,
I hate to say it like that, but it just
it's yeah, no, it's no longer existent. It's no longer a thing in our minds where it used to be a thing that we thought about weekly.
yes,
Weekly, if not, a few times a week. And so no, you're right. And it's always going to be one of the biggest, greatest shows ever. I remember just the hype. When the hype was there, it was bigger and
yeah,
better than any other show ever. I don't remember being as excited for episodes for any other TV show. Movies, yes. Movies are probably as
right.
big when you get to like Marvel and DC and stuff. Like BVS. I'm sure you agree with that.
With what? Beavis and
BVS.
Butthead.
Beavis. Exactly. Beavis and Butthead.
Oh no, actually, BVS is and Justice League are very similar to the way I felt about Game of
Ooh,
Thrones. I really try to justify it, but the further I get away from it, I was lying to myself. But
Ultimate
that's another
Edition.
that's
Ultimate
another
Edition
episode.
is uh
Look,
is on point.
look, I'll say this, and then we'll get back to Game of Thrones.
Sure.
If you have to continually bring out new additions to make these movies good, you have a problem in the initial making of the movies. Just gonna say that, okay? Not
That's another.
extended editions like Game of Thrones, where it just adds more cool stuff. Where you have to redo the movie to go this other version. Just say it. Back to Game of Thrones.
Technically, it was the original version, but that's neither here nor there.
That's not
Back
what
to
I saw
Game.
in theaters.
Back to Game of Thrones. That's where we're at. Bran's on the throne. Tyrion, leaves with his life. I'm I'm good with him being the Hand. It's not the most satisfying arc because he basically kind of starts and ends up exactly where he's at. You know,
Yeah,
he loses everybody along the way that he cared about. So that's development of his character. But he ends up exactly where he started, basically.
yeah. I mean, for him, I don't know what would have been satisfying for him.
I don't know either.
Maybe some sort of heroic death too, but you can't kill off too many of them.
No.
Um, and that was always his sweet spot was the behind the scenes, the using his brain to help the leaders. That was kind of always his strength. So it wasn't the most imaginative, or it wasn't anything that were like, oh, but I mean, it's where he kind of always was, and I'm not too upset with him being the Hand either. Maybe who he's Hand for, um, but it always seemed like he would wind up in some position like that. Whoever wound up on the throne.
So much potential, man. You know, lastly, I'll just say that you're never going to eliminate Game of Thrones from entertainment history. It's always
No,
going to be the biggest show of all time. I don't think any spin-off or sequel they decide to come up with is going to matter in the least.
no, I don't think so.
Maybe if you decide to do a series following Arya on her adventures sailing across the unknown world, I'll buy that. But John's not going to do anything interesting in the north. Sansa's not going to do anything interesting in the north, south, north. And then Arya is the only character that is remotely interesting left on the show. And I will also say that there was just so much potential that you could have tapped into.
Yeah,
Bran, you really didn't use any of his powers the
right.
last season, from what I can remember. And this is the guy that can see the future. I mean, he can just tell you,
He can, yeah,
kind
go
of
into
help.
memories.
Yeah,
He
he can
can,
kind of help people along the way or do something interesting with those powers, but nothing came of it. I really, 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 really wanted to see something happen with the Mad King going crazy. Burn them all. Burn them all. A lot
mm,
like Hodor. How is this going to come back into later in the Game of Thrones story? Was Bran going to be the one that accidentally makes the king go mad?
That was another
Was
theory for a
was
while.
Cersei gonna go insane and start screaming, burn them all? Or even no, Danny. Sorry, Danny.
Yeah.
Was Danny gonna go crazy and start screaming, burn
Well,
them
actually, I was
all?
going
And
to
then
say
maybe John kills her then.
Cersei did burn them all. She blew up. She blew up
The Sept, yeah.
the scepter whatever a couple of seasons before. Um, no, yeah, I agree with you. That was a fan theory too. That Bran had gone back into the memory of the king, and then you find out he really went mad at the end because, the in the similar way to Hodor, which by the way, also another episode that was just magnificent at the end.
Classic.
Figure out how he gets his name. So
Masterpiece.
heartbroken, and you're like, oh my god, yeah. Um, but yeah,
When
like
when this show is good, it's second to none.
yes, really
None.
was. Red Wedding,
Red
the end of
Wedding.
season one,
Yeah.
when Ned loses his head, I was like, because I thought he's the main character.
We
Like, oh,
all
Ned
did,
Stark,
man.
right?
We
And it's
all
like,
did.
oh, well, that's not what I expected.
The
Oh,
first battle with the Night King at the village
yes,
of the North Folk. I forget what they're all
where they
called
barely
now.
get out. Yeah, I know what you're talking about, but they barely get away, and then they all
They barely
stand
get
up,
away.
and
Masterful. My favorite episode of any show ever, the Battle of the Bastards. When
yes,
this show was good, it was absolutely spectacular, dramatic. You're with all of these characters, you're engaged, you're involved, you got so much invested. You're not going to get that again from any other show, not on this level, man.
I might just rewatch it to convince myself that season 7 is the end, and we never know what happens after the ice dragon brings down the wall.
That's what I did with Dexter. Everything ended after season 5.
Oh, I rewatched that a while ago, and the ending is trash. But
Trinity, that's it. When the Trinity season ends, that's the end of the show, man.
that's like season 3 or 4.
I think it's 5.
Trinity Killer.
Trinity,
What's his,
John
uh,
Lithgow.
yeah, that's maybe it is, but I
It's
still
either
feel like
4. It's either 4 or 5. It might be 4.
not to totally get off on Dexter on the Game of Thrones one.
Oh, good.
There's one season where he saves the girl, and she becomes his like he mentors her to kill people for a while.
Yeah,
What's the actress's name?
I'm not gonna remember the name.
Not Lily Sobieski. It's the other one I always confuse her with. Julius, I think it's Julia Stiles.
Not Julia Stiles.
No. Crap. Okay. Anyways,
The chick that leaves with his son at the end.
No, not her. That's what I'm talking about. There's a
Oh,
season where he saves her
maybe it's
from the
Julia
group of
Stiles.
guys. I think it's Julia Stiles.
Okay.
Anyways, I liked her a lot more than the girl who he winds up with. I never liked her in that show. The like girlfriend of the serial killer who she was also kind of like never liked that.
Maybe you and I need to do a Dexter
Let's do it.
retrospective,
I'm down with that too.
because it's going to be me for an entire hour just being pissed at the fact that he left his son with a psychotic bitch.
Although
You don't leave your son with a psycho person. What's wrong with you, Dexter?
another show that gave us a great meme. Surprise, mother.
Oh, forever. Oh my God. With that, I don't remember the actor's name, but one of the best characters in TV history.
Yeah.
So good.
Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones. Yeah, that's it. That's my last thoughts on it. You had potential. You could have tapped into it. If you would have just tapped into the lore and said, forget everything else, fans would have been more happy with that than perhaps how it ended for us. And it's not to say anybody watching this video or listening to this podcast, it's not to say that you're right or wrong. I'm not right or wrong. This is just my opinion. This is just how I feel. Your opinion could be the show ended exactly how it should have. There's some things that I'm totally down with. Danny going crazy, taking out King's Landing, despite how terrible that all is, I'm totally down with that. Watching that episode before the finale, episode 5, after the bells have rung and King's Landing is surrendered, I'm sitting there like, I really hope she just ignores the bells, because that's so dramatic. It's so dramatic. Listen, Game of Thrones is all about doing the wrong thing for dramatic effect.
Yeah.
We've seen it a dozen times and we're cool with it. But when you start doing the wrong thing and it doesn't hold up at all, that's when you start messing up, man.
I I know they spent season 8 and a little bit before that kind of setting up little things about her, distancing from John and feeling like everyone around her was not on her side anymore. I just wish there would have been a better actual individual moment that led her to decide to burn the city. Like I don't feel like there was the match that really. I felt like they just kind of like, oh well, she felt like things were getting away from her and that people weren't on her side. I'm gonna burn everything. I wish there was a more distinguishable moment where she snaps and
All right,
decides.
I'll play devil's advocate. Picture this. Bran starts warging. He travels back through time. He accidentally gets to the moment where Mad King goes crazy, touches him, does something. Mad King starts rambling off. Burn them all, burn them all, burn them all. Go back to the present. Danny's sitting on Drogon while the bells are going off, and she starts whispering to herself, "Burn them all, burn them all, burn them all, burn them all, burn
I
them
could
all," and she
I
starts
could
going
live with
ape
that.
shit. Holy crap!
I could live with that.
Oh,
That would have at least it would have
oh.
connected things. It would have
Mm.
given. Yeah, I could go with that.
I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. It didn't even happen. Can you imagine if that would have happened? If Bran is the reason why King's Landing gets destroyed and
Yeah,
he never comes up to it and then he sits on the throne afterwards? Oh my god, that's a total mind fuck right there.
that would have been something. I would have even gone with like Grey Worm dies.
Oh yeah.
Her last person that was on her side or defender, because she lost. What was the night at the long night? The one who
Jorah?
was in love with her. Yeah, Jorah, who was in love with her the whole time.
Love Jorah.
He goes. I did too. He goes out defending her there. And again, like we said, season 8, she started losing people who she felt was on her side. So I would have even if Grey Worm would have somehow died in that fighting at King's Landing, and then that would have been like, you know what? I've lost everyone I care about. I'm gonna, I don't care anymore. I'm just gonna burn it all down. Your idea would have been great. I would have even gone with just, Grey Worm dies and she's like, no one else is here. I'm going.
Peace. So much untapped potential.
I want to say a few things too before we kind of finish up.
Go
Going
for it.
back through, not just the finale. There was one episode I really liked that more than others because I mean I liked a lot of the long night, but there were things obviously condensing all the story of the White Walkers into that one
Sure.
night battle. But the episode before that, when they're preparing for that battle, is a lot of the characters just talking. But you get a lot of characters that haven't spent time around each other. And particularly, there's that scene where they're all in that room drinking just before the battle begins. And who's Tyrion Squire who impresses the ladies at the brothel?
I know you're talking about the singing guy. I'm not gonna remember his
Pod.
name.
Pod.
Podrick.
Sings like Jenny of Oldstone.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of comes out of nowhere. And that was a really good episode because they did a really good job of the personal interactions, the people who are all there who may not have spent most of the previous seasons around each other, and they're just talking. They kind of feel like they're all going to die, but they're just kind of in that like, well, here's to our last night. I really like that episode, and it didn't have to have the big battles. It didn't have to have the big set piece. You had amazing actors on this show, and I felt like you got away from them in situations away from that, like you were talking about going to those big set pieces. That episode before that, where they're just talking and interacting, Tyrion is his usual self.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed those scenes, and I just didn't get enough of that throughout the rest of it.
One of my biggest pieces of evidence for why the producers, the showrunners forgot about the point of the show came when John reveals his true parentage to his sisters, to Sansa and Arya.
They're out in the
by the Weirwood.
There you go. Yeah.
And Brand's like, you should tell him. And John's like, I don't want to. And Brand's like, you should tell him. And so John's like, okay. And you know what he tells Sansa and Arya? I don't, because they cut to the next scene. And we're just left to imagine the words that came out of his mouth. And it's like, are you joking with me right now? This is a tremendous moment. I mean, sure, Danny's more important, but don't you think the fans want to see the reaction from his sisters? And to me, it was a clear and blatant cop-out. You couldn't figure out how to do it. You couldn't come up with a great version of how to have this conversation, so you cut it out.
Yeah.
And I was just blown away. You never, hardly ever at least, got away from a situation where like a major conversation needed to occur. You were always diving into it.
Or they didn't go back later to the flashback later.
Anything.
That's something they do in TV sometimes. They don't show you the moment, but then at the end they'll do the flashback.
Sure.
I could have done that. You're right. To me, that should have been a big moment. Maybe not so much between Sansa and Jon, but Arya and Jon.
Yeah.
Their relationship was always close. That's something they established way at the beginning. Back in episodes, season 1. Arya always loved Jon at the place. And you're right. And I'm trying to remember because I don't think it happens. I feel like maybe this is what I envision in my head is Arya's like, I don't care. You're my brother.
Sure.
I don't care who you are. You're always, something like that. And I don't try to remember. I feel like I would remember if that happened. So I don't think it did.
I think they show like some aftermath or something where they kind of have little conversations either separately or something. Yeah. But the moment to see their reaction, to see their initial emotions, that stuff never happened. And it was the first time ever on the show watching it as a fan where I'm like, why would you avoid that? That doesn't make any sense. You didn't avoid any major conversations ever. And this is one of the biggest.
Yeah.
One of the biggest.
And that also would have shown that their dad really was honorable.
Yeah.
Like I kind of mentioned earlier, they all thought that he had gone off to that war, and even though everyone said Ned was the most honorable person, that he, had this one bastard child, then they could have found out a little bit about their dad at the end. Like, you know what? He actually did all this, sullied his own reputation for the love of family because he was trying to, keep that child also protected, but also, because of his sister. So,
Isn't that also on the whiteboard, clearing Ned's name?
You would think so.
Because he has that attached to his history, that he's not, an honest man or whatever. He has this one stain on his legacy. That's the only thing he has.
Yeah.
He has this one blemish on his legacy. Don't you try and, I mean, granted, there's not a lot of people alive left in Westeros, but that's probably something you clear up. So much potential
for the fans. I think. I mean, if you have been with the show the whole time, I think that would have been something to tie it back to the beginning and put a nice bow on it. But yeah,
I don't want to deter anyone who liked how it ended. I don't want to deter anyone that was pleased with how it ended. I'm just gonna say that season 8 was honestly the first time where I felt like the focus of the show, the focus of the series, was no longer in the front of everybody's mind who worked on the show. Yes, everybody who worked on the show is talented. Actors, writers, producers, I mean, everyone, special effects artists. I mean, nothing looked cheap. Everything
did you
was
watch
done.
The documentary they did afterwards?
Yeah, and I have tremendous respect for all those people. They were doing, some of the most dangerous things, working harder on this show than any other show ever has, arguably. Maybe except for like Dangerous Catch. Those guys, they're always in harm's way.
Yeah.
So, not taking anything away from the people that worked on the show, but the story was supposed to be the main focus, and it looks like it wasn't the main focus. It's probably number 3 or 4 on the list of things to cover, but it wasn't number 1, and it always was before that. I still love this show. I still love these characters, and I'm gonna love them more than I have basically any other show, and that's cool. I don't mind that. I'm still a big fanatic. I can't wait for the books to come out and see how this all really ends. Dear George, please get these books out.
And the next one is just 6. He's still going to be a 7 after that.
2020 needs some good news. Let's drop 6 and 7 at the same time, man. That'll blow everybody away and turn this year right around.
I love that fan rumor that that's actually what he's doing and that's what he's waiting for at this point, but who knows?
Everything will be forgiven and forgotten if you just do that, George. Go for it, man. Just do it. Oh, man. All right. Those are my final thoughts. Mike, you got anything else?
And yeah, like you kind of said earlier, to anyone who's watching this and you were like, "Oh, I really enjoyed it. I like that." We're not trying to crap on your opinion. No. We're not trying to do anything like that. I was just a diehard. I really got into the series. I like stories that pay off the things they set up. Yeah. I just felt like they fell short on this. Maybe I take it too seriously. Maybe some of you are like, you know what, it was fun. I enjoyed it. I watched it. Move on, and that's fine. But I would have loved to see them stretch this out to the full 10 seasons. I think there's stuff that in 7 and 8, if they would have had more time, you could have stretched out more.
Sure.
And to get the better story, and like we said, maybe if you go with a deeper story, you can better justify Bran being on the
throne.
On the throne, you can justify, Arya's arc. You can justify Jaime Lannister going back to his sister at the end. It just didn't seem like those were justified given what they had shown the last few seasons. So
you're absolutely right, sir. Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, this has been Game of Thrones, the season finale review. 1 year later. Thank you for watching this episode of the Countdown to the Geekcast. What did you think about Game of Thrones and how the show ended? We want to hear from you. Be sure to message us on Facebook. Just click the message button, or you can also email us.
Where is it going to be on this video? On the WrestleCast, we usually point down below.
Yeah, down below. That'd be good.
Okay. Excellent.
Or you can also email us on our website at www.countdowntothegeekcast.com. For the Countdown to the Geekcast, my name is Steady. With me on this Game of Thrones 1 year later episode, all the way from the Countdown City WrestleCast, which you can watch every single week on YouTube. If you're a wrestling fan, you should be doing it. Doesn't matter which agency or company
you follow,
watch. They do it all, baby.
We try to preview everything, the major ones: WWE, AEW, Impact,
NXT,
ROH, NXT. We have a guy who particularly is a big fan of the Japan wrestling.
Shout out to Tommy.
Into New Japan, Tommy. All Japan. He'll give you information on that. So yeah, if you're a wrestling fan, check it out. We enjoy it. We preview most pay-per-views and do a little bit of a recap afterwards, and just kind of try to hit the big stories as we go through.
And you can find the WrestleCast show on our YouTube channel at Countdown City Geeks. From the WrestleCast, thank you so much for joining me. It is the one and only Mike.
Thank you. My watch has ended.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Winter has gone.
Hey guys, AJ Nyland here. For more Geekcast episodes, subscribe to us on iTunes or your smart device podcast app. And please, write us a review. Be sure to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Countdown City Geekcast. Follow us on Twitter at ccg_podcast or visit our website at www.countdowncitygeekcast.com.